Hello and welcome to part 3 of the Franchise Business Review Development Series. I'm Michael Kupfer, and I'm joined today by our company founder and CEO, Eric Stites, who will be moderating today's panel discussion. Our session title today is The Tipping Point, Best Practices for Closing Deals. And our panelists are 3 great franchisors with different perspectives on the topic. Please welcome Dustin Hansen, the CEO Americas for InXpress, Jenna Lamb, the Director of Franchising at Nothing Bundt Cake, and Eric Little, the Chief Development Officer for RiseMark Brands, which is the parent company of Right at Home. Thank you all for being here today. We're looking forward to another great discussion to wrap up our series. And Eric Stites, let me go ahead and hand this off to you to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Thanks for our esteemed panelists. I know you guys are all looking forward to some great information this afternoon. I want to start off with just a quick little slide here and a comment to just tell you that coffee is for closers. So for those that have seen Glengarry Glen Ross, I was going to actually have a poll question in there for how many have seen the movie and how many times you've actually seen the movie. But and I think I was given this session to moderate today by our staff because I have this frequent debate with people in the franchise world about whether franchising is about selling or recruiting franchisees. And so we're going to talk, we won't get into too much detail around that today, but do want to spend a lot of time talking about getting closed deals, getting your pipeline down to the bottom and getting as many candidates, quality candidates as you can out of that. To start, I want to look at some data. And when you look at the population in the United States, there's essentially 250 million adults that are walking this planet today, in the United States. 225 million of those are essentially what we call dreamers. Those are people that one day want to own their own business and think about owning a business from time to time and may kick the tires from time to time with a franchise opportunity. But thanks to franchise data and Edith Weissman for sharing a stat with me today, there's actually only 22,500 new buyers coming into the marketplace each year. What that number is, there's essentially 50,000 new deals being done each year in a ballpark. This is data from 2015. But the majority of the deals are actually multi-unit deals with existing franchisees. So if you think about 22,000, just over 22,000 new buyers coming into the marketplace, that is a pretty small pool. And that's 1 in 10,000 people. And I actually had to Google this. Your chances of being struck by lightning in your lifetime are 1 in 12,500. So the odds of buying a franchise are pretty close to the odds of being struck by lightning in your lifetime. It's a pretty amazing stat. And then when we look at data from the franchise industry, thanks to Franchise Update, they do an annual development survey at their conference that they do each year. And Mike, if you want to advance that slide to show their latest data, really it's been about a 2% close rate for the last so many years. There was a little bump in 2014, but all in all, we're looking at an average 2% close rate across all your lead sources. And what's interesting too is that in recent years we've seen a dip in the application to close rate. And I'm guessing that's probably because the economy's gotten a little bit better. More people are feeling encouraged to get into franchising. Franchisors today compared to 2010, 2011, 2012 timeframe are probably getting a lot more leads and a lot more applications, so they can be a little bit more selective. But it is interesting, and what we'll get into exactly what your close rates are and how you can improve those. What I want to do is I want to go to our panelists. And we hear so much about technology today, and all of us are so technologically tied into our businesses and our lives. I want to start with Jenna and talk to you about how you're using technology and what role technology is playing in your sales process, and specifically, how is it helping you close more deals or at least speed up that process of closing deals?
Okay, sure. Absolutely, Eric. Well, we worked with Process Peak initially about 7 years ago to set up our pipeline catalyst. They are now obviously Fran Connect, but we still have our pipeline catalyst in place, and it's been a work in progress for the past 7 years. The way that we set that up was to be a very amazing educational tool for candidates to go through the process in a guided fashion, and the way that I set it up with them is to make it more of an education rather than a sales tool. I always tell candidates that I'm not trying to sell them on this, that I really want to paint a realistic picture for them, not always a rosy picture, and I do use technology to guide them through the process in a virtual brochure. Typically we schedule weekly phone calls. The process overall takes about 30 to 45 days, ideally. Of course, all of us know that it can often take longer than that. But another thing that we do is utilize a PowerPoint, which is a final project for candidates to complete before they come out to the final interview, where they actually put together a PowerPoint. It's 8 slides. They also do about a 15 to 20-minute audio recording in conjunction with that PowerPoint. And what that is basically their business plan for how they're going to be a successful Nothing Bundt Cakes franchisee. So we use that. And then the final section call that I have with our franchisees, which is all about the final interview, I do that via Blue Jeans, which is a video capable tool that we use. So they can actually see my face. And I believe that that is something I'm going to actually implement more in my process, is more of that personal connection, because our brand is very warm and fuzzy and requires that personal connection more than others sometimes. So I think that that's been really helpful. They absolutely love seeing the person's face that they've been working with for the past 30 to 45 days, and that's been an incredible change in my close rate. So technology piece of it is really important for us, and that's something that's been a huge benefit to making candidates feel like the process is very organized and like we know what we're doing, which is obviously good peace of mind for them as they're going through the process and looking at a brand that they're going to marry.
Right, right. Dustin, how about you? What role is technology playing with your brand today?
Well, I appreciate the question. And listen, everyone uses technology. We all know how important technology is in the world today in different areas of our businesses and our lives. I think it's how we use the technology is critical for us in having success and gaining what we want out of the technology. In our franchise development process, we use Fran Connect quite extensively, and that really is beneficial for a few different reasons. You know, allows us the full accountability with our team, gives us the visibility of our candidates and our pipeline and where they're at, which for me and in my team, the recruitment process is all about follow up and follow through. And the use of technology to make sure that we're on top of that is critical for our success. But one of the pieces of the technology that we use really effectively is not only the email campaigns, but what's in the email campaign. So, for example, our brand InXpress, we're in the logistics space. And so when we're communicating with our candidates, we're sending them industry articles from the Wall Street Journal or other sources that specifically talk about logistics and what's happening in the world of logistics, and giving them insights around our space. And that helps them not only to see what our franchise offering and the industry we're involved in, but it actually, for us, allows us to train our franchisees before they actually buy a franchise. So we see that not only education on the brand that they're hopefully going to purchase a franchise from, but also what they're going to do once they're in the brand, the knowledge base they start with once they get involved with us. So that's important for us. So again, for us, the technology piece is around the pipeline. It's around the touch point. We use text quite a bit. I wrote down a note from Jenna. We don't use face-to-face for our conversations, but I love the idea, so I've written that down, and we're going to start to use that more effectively as we go forward. So again, for me, Fran Connect, the email piece is the content that's designed there, texting, the accountability piece and the reports.
Awesome, awesome. Eric, how about you guys? What technology is playing a role, and maybe what technology do you see that doesn't really make that much difference?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a good question. I think we all use technology to make ourselves more efficient. I mean, that's the ultimate goal of it, and that's certainly the way that we use it at RiseMark. And we've got our CRM. We, just like the others have talked about, we've got our CRM that we use. I liked what Jenna said about the face-to-face aspect of it as well. We also are developing internationally, and so it's not fancy, but we use Skype quite a bit with our international prospects for master franchisees, and I have found that the relationship just builds so much faster if you have that face-to-face connection with them. And even though that he and I only met one time. The guy that we just signed in the Czech Republic, we're on a hug basis now because we've talked so much by Skype. We feel like we've gotten to know each other really well, and so I think that face-to-face portion is important. As far as what's going on here in the U.S., I mean, I think we've got a lot of what everybody else has. We have our CRM, we have our auto emails, and we also have, using the CRM, we have the sales triggers set up. So just as an example, several years ago, I was kind of coaching the sales team on, how to set a prospect up for validation. In other words, what should we be doing to educate them so that they can get the best experience out of that time in the process. And I don't know, for those of you on the call that have done that, I mean, if you try to anticipate everything that our prospects in a year, that's going to turn out to be a really long phone call. And so I sat down and wrote a blog post and put it out on our franchise development blog. And the auto email just, every time the sales status changes to validation in the database, this blog gets emailed to the prospects, and so they've got it all right there before they start validating with our franchisees. So it's just, I think the technology for us is really just about timely delivery of information that they need at the time that they need it.
Right. Dustin, I want to follow up on a quick question from Kathy. You mentioned texting, and I know a lot of our clients have talked about texting now as more effective than email, even in some cases. Can you just elaborate a little bit on how you guys are using texting? Is it just one-to-one, or are you using some mass texting tools? Or
Yeah, good question. We don't use a texting tool at this point. It's more one-on-one, and we'll do it in lots of different ways. If the candidate has a birthday coming up, of course, we've got a trigger in our CRM that has someone send a text to them. I'm a millennial, and of course we get accused quite a bit of using texting too much or technology too much, right? So, but that trickles over into the team that we've got, and the one-on-one confirmation for a call, one-on-one text after the call is over to say, hey, thanks for joining me, enjoyed our time today. It's just a little bit more personal than an email.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I know that a number of our clients have mentioned that they've been using texting a lot more effectively to just get people appointments set, and it's a lot of people, especially millennials, as you say, are not even using email and just using text exclusively. So I want to change topics a little bit and talk a little bit about transparency through the sales process. And I'll thank Mike here for the great slide, but obviously every franchise system has their good things, their not so good things, and maybe a few bad things. And how do you go about yourself, as well as some of your salespeople, talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly throughout, and really encouraging sales or transparency through the sales process? And Eric, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, this is something I have a lot of passion about. Having been in franchising for as long as I have now, one of the things I have learned is if you don't set accurate expectations on the front end and throughout the process, it's just going to end badly. And so we really have driven that as not only as our culture amongst the whole company, but especially on my sales team. We want to make sure that we get people through that process, get them on the other side after signing, after payment of the franchise fee, and then have them come back and say, you know what, it's exactly exactly what you thought it was going to be, and we've benefited from that. I mean, the FPV shows a really low failure rate, and so there's a great sort of long-term focus on the team. But some of the things that we've done to drive that, we have these things called fireside chats, and I think we've borrowed that from one of my salespeople that just, he said, we need to get all the prospective franchisees on the phone at the same time who are interested in talking to us, and have all the corporate salespeople on the phone as well. And what that has done, first of all, it shows great transparency. We don't even we don't mute the call, so it's live. We have prospective franchisees on there that have reached a certain point in the sales process, and they're all invited to speak up and ask questions. And the cool part about that is, if if a candidate asks a question, typically the director knows which if that's his or her lead, and so that director will purposefully not answer the question because they know that they probably already answered it. And so what ends up happening is the other directors get to hear how they answer questions, and so not only does it show transparency in the process, but it brings everybody's competency level up as well. Something else that we do that has been well received, and I'm guessing some of the other panelists do this as well. Not a new idea, but we have two brands under RiseMark. We have Run at Home and iCore, and so what we do is an executive phone call with each brand each month for all prospects. So anybody that wants to come to that, they can get online with the CEO and ask them anything that they want to ask. And so we really feel like that sets the tone here. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't do us any good to oversell the business up front just to drive interest, because those prospects are eventually going to validate and they're going to fall out. And so what we've done is we've just gone the other direction, and we've kind of adopted the mantra that really there are no secrets, and they should know what the warts are of our business by the time they get to validation. And the last thing you want to have happen is to have sugarcoated and rounded off the rough edges too much to where your franchisees talk to them and the business doesn't even sound familiar because it wasn't described accurately up front.
Right. Dustin, to borrow a word from Mr. Little, how do you disclose your warts as well as the good and the benefits of your system? I'm sure you don't have any warts.
No, of course we're a perfect franchise organization, right? We have thought really outside the box on this one, and so I'll share with you what we did and have done and a change we made in this year, 2016. Previous to 2016, we tried our best to share all the goods and bads about being a franchise owner for InXpress, but our passion seemed to overcome sometimes to cover some of the weaknesses. So we said, how can we really get the message to our franchisees that there are certain warts that they've got to be able to be prepared for? And so our franchise salespeople, our franchise development directors, they're actually existing franchisees. We don't employ separate employees to do our franchise sales. We actually have used now 5 franchisees that are that give about 20 hours a week to franchise recruitment. And this has a two-prong approach. Number one, it actually helps them to grow their franchise, because if they're teaching others, they realize the things that they need to do with their team to help their franchise grow faster, because the teacher is always the best learner or student. But in addition to that, when our candidates are going through the process, again, they have their salesperson, their development director is a franchisee, and so that franchisee knows all the goods and bads, and they share them very openly with the candidate. And our development director that is a franchisee, they know that they are going to work with this person after they buy a franchise, so they know it's to their advantage from building a relationship to be completely transparent and open about the goods and the bads. And again, it really allows a better connection with the brand, because the candidate is learning about the business from a franchisee from day one, as well as validating with other franchisees about the brand. And that peer-to-peer communication, as we all know, is so much stronger than the parent-child communication. So again, these candidates are getting that peer-to-peer communication from the moment they express interest in our brand. And again, our franchisees that act as our development directors, they hold the hand of the candidate from day one. They take them through the entire process. They do all 8 steps with that franchisee. They attend Discovery Day with them, and it really helps them get through the process. And it helps when the onboarding team takes over, because the candidate who's purchased has a mentor inherently already assigned to them, again, based on the relationship they've had. So I don't know how that helps everyone that's on the call other than just to think outside the box a bit, because we've really done something different than I think most brands look to do.
Yeah, I think that's a very unique approach, and I think a lot of franchisors would shudder at the prospect of, taking time away from their franchisees growing their own business to work on development. Obviously, it's working for you guys, and it works obviously very well. So that's that is an interesting approach. Jenna, what are you guys doing again around the transparency issue and helping candidates really understand both the good and maybe some of the challenging areas of your business?
Sure. Well, I honestly feel like this has a lot to do with the personality of the sales rep and how well they're able to connect with people in general. They have to build rapport and trust as quickly as possible in the initial phone call, and having somebody that is very genuine and honest at the front line does that. And I think just coming clean with challenges in the system from the start in that initial phone call and acknowledging those challenges is very, very helpful. Again, I tell candidates that I'm going to paint them a realistic picture and not always a rosy one. I do want them to know what they're getting involved in, and I also ask them to make the same promise to me. I would like to get the same level of transparency from them as we go through this process and build that trust on both sides. So I have no issue discussing challenges or learnings with the candidates because it would be unrealistic if we didn't have those. So doing that, in my opinion, really does lend to the full transparency on both sides that I promised from the beginning, and I always maintain that as we go through every step of the process.
That's great. Yeah, and that is confirmed in a lot of the clients that we work with. That I think a number of franchisors are always afraid to, disclose too much, and it's really, we find that, the ones that do, disclose a lot, both the good, the bad, and the ugly, get that more real candidate, and they build that relationship, and it does help ultimately in the sales process. And the reality is, if you're going to scare somebody away with, some maybe not so positive news about your business or the challenges about your business, they're not a real candidate anyway. So, kudos to you guys to being that transparent. So, Dustin, I want to go back to you, and I want to talk a little bit about the franchise disclosure document. When we're talking about transparency, it doesn't get much more transparent in a lot of businesses than the FDD. And can you share with us just a little bit about when in the process you share that document and how you use it as a potential sales tool?
Yeah, good question, good area of focus. For us, we have an 8-step franchise recruitment process, and sharing the franchise disclosure document is step 5. So it's about halfway, a little bit more than halfway in the process. And to be honest, this is one of the areas that we're looking at strengthening because we don't use it very well at the moment as a sales tool. There are some areas that we could really strengthen. So we're learning from industry experts right now what we can do, and it's quite eye-opening how you can actually use the FDD as a sales tool. And I'm not an expert, so I won't share that with everyone today. I think the other panelists probably better speak to it. But for us, we want to get it in the hands of the FDD, in the hands of the candidate early, but we do that through an actual review of the FDD. So we don't just send it to them, but the process is actually get them in their hands and walk them through it before they actually take it away and start to study it, because we really want them to understand some of those clauses and not to have someone read something and run the other way thinking that it's too restrictive or don't really understand the FDD and different items as well as we do. So that's when we disclose it, and that's how we use it.
Great. Jenna, how about you guys? Do you disclose it early or later in the process?
We actually disclose it very early in the process. So after the lead call and collection of the application form and NDA, I set up our initial hour-long section call to start the virtual brochure process. And it's at the end of that phone call that I disclose candidates and walk them through the franchise disclosure document. I set the expectations for that document. I think it's important to acknowledge upon disclosure that the document's going to come across as biased and one-sided toward the franchisor. but also that it's written in a way to protect the system and the brand as a whole. And I also make sure that candidates are aware at that point that the FDD is a non-negotiable document, so that we're being fair and consistent with all of our franchisees. And that really alleviated a lot of headaches for me before I started setting that expectation, because then they know, all right, well, I can't make changes to this, so I need to be able to feel comfortable with it, just as the other franchisees in the system have been treated before me. So I also believe that disclosing candidates earlier in the process lends itself to the transparency that we were just talking about.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think that, putting that expectation out there early that it's a non-negotiable, the franchise agreement is non-negotiable, is obviously important. I know a number of candidates that I speak to at the franchise expos, want to run and take their disclosure documents to their Uncle Bill or some other family relative to review and red line, and you don't want that to certainly to happen. So, Eric, how about you guys? How do you use the FDD to your advantage, and when are you delivering it in the process?
Yeah, but by the way, it's always the uncle. It's not why it's the uncle. This is the one that's seen as the family's advisor, but it's the same for us.
True.
I agree with Jenna. The very early on is when we shared. I mean, there were companies in the past that I've been with where the philosophy was, this is you got to hold it back, you got to play things close to the vest, and again on the transparency thing, we've kind of gone really, completely the other direction to where there aren't a lot of secrets out there today. So we share very early if it's, we work with a lot of franchise brokers as well. So if it's a broker lead, the FDD goes out right away. We do still send paper ones in addition to the electronic ones though. And then if it's a non-broker lead, so if it's from a source that's off of the internet or whatever, typically we send that one out as soon as the application comes back in. As far as using it as a sales tool, I think that, there's a couple of things I think that I could share. One is, the item 11 in there is a really good place to use the FDD to kind of talk about what you've already spoken about in the webinar. So in other words, early on, as soon as we get the application in, we've got about an hour and a half or 2 hour webinar that we use, and it works really well. And of course, it looks good, it's visually pleasing, it's professionally designed, and so everybody kind of expects that on the front end. And the technology, we use a technology called ClearSlide that I highly recommend that. It works really well. But the nice thing about the call that we do for the FDD is there's none of that. There's no marketing fluff. There's no design, cool colors and graphics in it. It's just the FDD. And so we literally will walk them through item 11 and say, okay, this is, it says we're going to do this. Remember we talked the other day what that looks like. And so it just gives us a chance to reinforce what we've already talked about with them, but it just, maybe their guard's down a little bit more because it's less of a sales presentation and more of walking them through it. The other thing that we like to do is, I really look at it as kind of franchising 101. In other words, most people that we talk to, they've never evaluated a franchise before. Nobody ever teaches them how to evaluate a franchise. And so if we know we've got somebody on the phone who hasn't really looked at franchising very closely, we might just take a step back and say, this is a standard document, and whether you acquire McDonald's or us, the same 23 items are here. That way you can compare apples to apples. And people really, they just appreciate you kind of taking on that role of a coach there with them, and they seem to really appreciate that. And again, we're tying a lot of these things back to transparency, but going that extra step seems to be something that people appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually surprised a little bit at our poll results because, I know a few years ago, people always, did not want to send their FDD or did not look forward to sending the FDD and educating candidates about it. And so it's a little surprising, I guess, and encouraging to see that 61% feel that their FDD, that they can be proud of it and that it's helping them close deals. So that's a great statistic. I mean, certainly in the age of transparency and the internet, people are getting a hold of FDDs a lot earlier, and I think that FDDs have certainly come a long way in the last 20 years. Eric, sticking with you for a few minutes here, just to kind of take that to the next level of, delivering the FDD and serious candidates starting to begin the validation process. Obviously, again, going back to the whole warts thing, not every franchisee is happy, certainly. They're going to hear the good, the bad, the ugly when they talk to franchisees. How are you kind of teeing up that conversation with candidates as they begin the validation process and setting, that expectation like you have been as far as what they may hear and how they should handle that and additional questions they may ask and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a separate phone call for us. It's a nice image, by the way, Eric. But yeah,
I thought you'd like that.
Yeah. It's a separate phone call. So what we do is when we get to the end of that FDD review, just like with every other step in the process, we'll say, we've accomplished what we wanted to do today. Would you like to continue to the next step? And if they say yes, which usually they do if they've gone that far, then we'll schedule another phone call. And again, taking on the role of that coach, right? I mean, everybody, even the most successful athletes have specific coaches, and so we talk a lot about that. And so we schedule a phone call to go through it. And I hired a mystery shopper a few years ago, and at that time, we were really focused on making sure that we anticipated everything they might hear, and then we set it to that, set it to our prospects. And so finally, Jeff Sturgis, who did the mystery shop.
I was going to say, did you know that we took a picture? Little did you know that we took a picture of your mystery shopper.
Yeah, that's not Jeff Sturgis, but it looks a little bit like him. But Jeff came back and he's like, "Gosh, Eric, man," he said, "that was such a painful phone call. You guys are, you're trying to anticipate all the roadblocks." Here we were, and so it was our own fault. And so what we do now is we pared that down. We do the blog that I talked about a little bit earlier, but for us, really, we want to get them in the right mindset. And so I'll tell you, validation, as far as I'm concerned, is the riskiest part of the process for any of us, because that's the part that we have the least amount of control over, right? I mean, everything along the way is all scripted, and you can answer the question. And if it's you that's driving the bus there, then certainly you can control the messaging. But once that prospect goes after the franchisee, anything can happen, and you can catch them on a bad day. And so some of the things that we talk about are, on the Right at Home side, we require that they talk to at least 3 franchisees, and that they also ask about some of the challenges in the business. And they shouldn't really hear anything that they haven't already heard from me. I want them to hear from me, as an example, not from me, but from my salespeople, that the caregivers call in sick off the shifts, and that you have to deal with that. And the real way to handle those kinds of things is to talk about what the objection is, and then talk about what the franchisor and the franchisee have done, or what we do when that kind of thing happens. So I think that's exceptionally important. I think the other thing, and this is really hard to do, I think, especially if you're a new salesperson, if that prospect isn't at least 70 or 80% of the way there, in other words, if they're not, 70 or 80% chance of becoming a franchisee, we won't let them validate. And we'll ask them, we'll talk to them and we'll say, hey, what do you think the chances are that you're going to become a franchisee? We're just a few weeks out from Discovery Day here. 3 or 4 weeks from now, you could potentially be a franchise owner. How does that make you feel? And right? The ones that are, that are engaged, and they say, oh yeah, it sounds great. If you get the hesitation on the other end of the phone, the worst thing you can do at that moment is send them out to talk to your franchisees. They've got some hesitations, and I would much rather have a conversation with them before they go talk to the franchisees, rather than have them hear something that that's going to cause them to go away if it's a good prospect. So anyway,
right.
That's a lot of words, but basically, it doesn't do us any good to sugarcoat it up front.
And I'm sure your franchisees appreciate that, they're only validating with serious candidates, and, the fewer calls they get from people, the better off for your franchisees as well. So they know they're only talking to serious people. Dustin, how about you guys? What do you do, Dustin, to address, some of the naysayers that people may run into?
Yeah, there's 2 things that we do that we really set and talk to the candidate about before they go to validation. And the first one is just a reminder and understanding that our franchisees, and they are looking at small business ownership through franchising. and small business ownership isn't easy. And that's why so few of the American population actually jump into small business ownership. So let them know, listen, there's going to be struggles, there's going to be tough days, and when you're talking to our franchisees, you might catch them on a tough day. They're going to mention struggles. That's part of small business ownership. So it lets them and gives them the understanding that when people within our franchise network, our franchisees, talk about some of the struggles that they have during the validation call, it's actually a validation that this is small business ownership and that it's not this scary thing. The second thing we do is we just remind and educate our candidate that, listen, in every organization and franchise organization, there's a top 20%, middle 60%, and bottom 20%. And you're going to have conversations with all three of those groups. And so, you might be talking to a bottom 20%, and that's a real opportunity for you to, as you validate, to figure out why are they the bottom 20%? Why are they struggling? What are they doing? And rather than, take their comment as the network and the brand and the franchise opportunity doesn't work, rather make a note to say, this is what I don't want to do when I move forward as a small business owner through InXpress franchising opportunity. So by just educating them on that 20-60-20, it just prepares their mind better to have those conversations. And again, having the perspective of being a small business owner gets them prepared for those tough conversations. Now, again, we're a bit unique where our franchise development directors are franchisees, and so they've really prepared them well by sharing and being more transparent about what the day of a InXpress franchisee looks like and some of the obstacles they run into. So we get quite excited when a candidate gets to the validation part, because for us they've been so well prepared and they've had so much transparency and insights that we're not nervous about what they're going to hear, because they've probably heard everything already from us and the team they've worked with.
Great.
I think that's a good point. I think that's, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Eric.
Well, I think that's a good point about talking to them about, franchisees having good days and bad days. I mean, those are the kinds of things that I have in that blog post that I talked about earlier. And you just never know. First of all, you never know what kind of day they're having. And secondly, you don't know if that person is naturally an optimist or a pessimist or somewhere in the middle. And so for that reason, one of the things that we say is, don't let just one phone conversation sway you one way or the other. In other words, don't let just one person talk you into it, and don't let one person talk you out of it. I think that giving them, it's almost like you have to give prospective franchisees permission to move forward, even though they may hear, some negatives.
Right. Jenna, how about you guys? How are you addressing any negative feedback that candidates might get during the validation process?
Sure. Well, you definitely have to acknowledge that it's a possibility that they're going to get some negativity from franchisees in validation, even if it's limited. I always tell candidates to keep in mind, like any organization, we have three groups of owners. We have star performers at the top, we have mainstreamers who do well, and we do have those few who are struggling. So the critical question for them is going to be, who do I identify with the most, and which franchisees in this system have the same type of personality, the same skill sets and business characteristics that are like mine, and are the types of owners that I see myself being. So setting that expectation with them, letting them know that they're going to come across all different kinds of owners. And I like the point about acknowledging what their day is like, because you never know if all of their employees called off on them that day, or their oven went down, or something happened to cause an issue with just their attitude. So in speaking with somebody that has difficult challenges, I encourage candidates to try to dig in a little bit, find out what the problems might be, determine whether or not it's something that stems from the franchisor, and then I also have candidates complete a survey after validation with our franchisees, outlining what issues they came across, if any, what was good about the system, what learnings they took away, where we can improve. And then I also, in my notification to our franchisees about a candidate that's about to enter into validation, I include a link to a survey for our franchisees about the candidate. So we really take feedback on both sides of the coin. And if our franchisees come back to me and they say, you know what, Jenna, I had a conversation with a candidate and I'm really worried, I really don't think that they're the right fit, then I listen to that. And I think that's really important to get their buy-in as well.
That's great. Yeah, I know certainly a lot of systems follow up with franchisees to say, hey, what'd you think? But having that formal feedback loop, I think, is critical, and certainly it tells your franchisees that they're an important part of the process as well. And Jenna, just sticking with that thought for, I mean, you kind of teed up the next question perfectly, is, you know, for those, I mean, every system knows who those franchisees are that are always going to be, you know, the naysayers, or the, you know, the kind of the Eeyore, if you will. I play that role in my office, but you know, every once in a while, obviously people have a bad day, or things come up that you didn't know about, and you're like, oh, you know, and it really torpedoes that candidate. What do you do from the sales team perspective, development team perspective, to follow up with franchisees that you may have heard didn't validate well, or, you know, even identify them in that initial process? Is that something you guys take on, or do you just kind of pass it off to operations? How do you handle that?
Well, I actually handle that personally because I have a solid relationship with all of our franchisees. I have led the sales department completely on my own since we had 13 bakeries. We now have 240. So I have a really strong personal relationship with all of the franchisees in our system, and I have no problem picking up the phone and talking with them about what struggles they may be having and finding out how we can support them. And, you know, I heard this invalidation, but I also do my very best to not throw a candidate under the bus for being a tattletale, because I think that they worry that if they're going to come back to me and tell me something negative that someone specific said, that it's going to circle back to the franchisee and come back on them. So I'm really cognizant of that and cautious about that as well. So in this particular case, because I have such a strong relationship with our system, I just call them directly, and if I need to involve operations, then I will. I will definitely do that, but I typically tend to talk to the franchisee first, engage whether or not it was a bad day comment, or if there's some meat to it.
Right. Eric, how about you guys? What processes do you have in your system to identify any validation issues that might be coming up, and how do you follow up with the franchisees on that?
Oh yeah, the key is the follow-up. I mean, if you get this feedback, you definitely need to act on it. I think you know, it's not always easy to do that. It feels a little awkward when I've made those calls like Jenna has to franchisees, and it's not always the easiest conversation to have. But I think they appreciate being direct about it, and it's just, you know, it's really important, and she alluded to this as well, it's really important that when you do have a conversation with them, it's not really, you don't want them to come across from, you don't want them to come away from that conversation feeling like they've done something wrong, right? You want it to have positive intent behind it, and so we're real clear with them about the conversation and what was said, and then we try our best to get them to frame the conversation from the prospect's point of view, right? You know, determine what their true intent was. I mean, was there some small little thing that was a big deal in their mind that caused that call to go that direction? Or, you know, is this a trend? I mean, have we heard this from multiple people? And obviously those are pretty powerful phone calls. If I hear lots of negativity from multiple prospects, I can be a little more assertive in my comments with that particular franchisee. But it's also really important, really important to figure out if it's territory related or not. You know, and I've had that happen a number of times where, and those of us on the call probably, that a lot of us have come across this where a franchisee will validate poorly because they don't want somebody else in there next to them, right? And so in those cases, I mean, and I've had it happen before. Well, they'll validate negatively, and then they'll come back and say, okay, I'm ready. Send me the documents. And that doesn't feel good. And so we'll talk about that directly with them. I think the other thing is, and this really is a cultural thing, in some systems, and I've certainly had those in the systems that I've worked with as well, there seems to be an us and a them. In other words, the existing franchisees, if they feel like all you're interested in is selling new franchises, then they are going to validate poorly if they're not getting proper support. And so it's just important to help them understand how a growing, thriving brand that is in demand and assigning new franchisees is going to help the overall system, prosper. Years ago, I'll give you a specific example. I had a franchisee who, same thing, the geography on the other side of the river, so to speak, right across from this territory wasn't any good. And I asked him, I said, well, what research have you done over there? He said, well, I live here. I haven't really looked at it that closely. And I said, okay, well, we have, and here's what we found. And so anyway, I walked them through this conversation, talked about the overall, vision for the brand and how we would all be better off with more franchisees paying royalties and all those kinds of things. So it worked out. But, I'll come back to what I said in the beginning. It's tempting sometimes just to overlook that to-do item on your list. But I think it's exceptionally important if you want to move the system forward.
Yeah. Dustin, anything to add there as far as following up with franchisees that may have some validation issues?
I think that most of it's been covered. Just a nugget from me that we've realized is our field support team, we call them coaches, but our field support team lives and thrives off of getting feedback from validation, because it allows them to have insights to a franchisee's mind that they might not tell that field support person directly. And boy, can we tailor a plan to assist and support that franchisee at a higher level without them realizing even that we know their minds better than they've shared with us. So just overall critical nature to get that information and use it with the team to support that franchisee can go a long way to build a brand.
Right. And a question that came in from Kathy too, for if anybody wants to comment on it, as far as in this age of transparency that we live in, how do you avoid having applicants, candidates start the validation process early? I know some people use passwords with their franchisees, different codes like that. Anybody doing something like that in their system?
I can
this is Eric.
Go ahead, Eric.
Well, yeah, ours is very simple. So every day about 4 o'clock, the admin for our department uploads the list of candidates that have made it into at least validation stage and forward. And so that's updated once a day, every day about 4 o'clock, and we train the franchisees and let them know. Actually, when they're here during new franchisee training, we let them know at that point, where to find that list. So the idea is that anytime they get a candidate phone call like that, they can reference the list online to see if they're on there, and then we tell them, don't talk to them if they're not on that list. But also, we want to capture the call, because we do occasionally get people that just jump right into it without even calling us to begin with. So we try to capture the information.
Yeah, Jenna, you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So on our end, once I convert a candidate from a suspect to a lead, and I walk them through next steps over the portal, one thing that I upload for them right away is a very detailed breakdown of our process. I believe that's one of the handouts that I provided for you today, everybody. So in that breakdown of the process, there's a very clear expectation of what we're going to cover in each section and what each of our responsibilities are going to be, so they can see where validation falls in the process. And I also let them know that there will come a point where they're going to be able to speak to our existing franchise owners. This is all before they're making any commitments to us. But before they do that, I'm going to have to send an email out to the system letting them know that these particular candidates are approved to speak with them. If they reach out before that email goes out to the system, then they're going to get limited information. But once that email goes out, the floodgates open, and they know that franchisees know that these candidates are approved to speak with. So they tend to be a lot more open with their information at that time.
Perfect. And Dustin, do you have any issues with people prematurely validating?
We might, again, be kind of weird on this, but we encourage it when people come through the first step. We invite them on a validation calls and say, call our franchisees right now. So we actually like it when they get involved in the validation process early, even though they don't understand everything about the brand. We want them to have those conversations straightforward. So yeah, we're a little different. We're happy with them starting as early as they can.
Great. And Dustin, we'll stay with you for a minute. We've talked a lot about transparency and obviously the validation process, and I think you guys have very tight processes. But what do you really do at the end of the day when you've got a candidate that's moving forward and looks like they're going to close? What do you do to ensure that they haven't been oversold by somebody on your team, and that they really do have the right expectations? I mean, that's the biggest thing that we see in the research that we do is that franchisees just come in with these pie in the sky expectations, for what their business is going to do. It's not always the franchise salesperson that, falsely set those expectations. It might have been, a neighbor that they knew that owned a business, or some, friend or Uncle Vinny or whoever it is. But what do you do in your process to really make sure that, franchisees are coming in or candidates are coming in with those realistic expectations and not being oversold?
Yeah, so tactically we do a couple things. During our discovery day, we have the candidates stand up and give us a presentation on themselves, and we give them some slides and some questions that we'd like to have answered, and part of that is what is their expectation if they were to be awarded the opportunity to move forward in owning an InXpress franchise. And it's remarkable what information you get by making it more formal and having them stand and present to us as a group during Discovery Day. And if during that presentation we find that the expectations aren't realistic or aren't in line with what we consider acceptable, then we make sure we address it during that Discovery Day. We do it one-on-one with the candidate as well. We actually follow up with that again after Discovery Day. Once the candidate leaves, we come back to them and have them kind of fill out a one-pager for us, and this is in addition to a business plan, but kind of a one-pager for us and saying, what's your expectations for your first year, second year, and third year? And again, we want to know that so that we can coach and support them properly, but if something comes outside the lines of acceptable, then we pull back, have that conversation, and we pull in a franchisee or two if we need to really explain why maybe those expectations that they have aren't in line with where we're going. If we don't feel like that franchisee then can really get to a place where their expectations kind of again meet what we deem to be acceptable, then we just depart from them and say, thanks but no thanks. But most often they kind of come around and start to get an idea of what it is they'll actually be expected to do and what they can count on.
Right. I love it. I love it. For those that were kind of snoozing during that moment, hit the rewind button on the recording for the last 3 minutes, because that is having the franchisee candidate do a presentation at Discovery Day, I think is a huge gold nugget that everybody should be doing. Jenna, how about you guys? What are you doing to ensure that candidates are coming in with the right expectations?
Sure, and I just want to go back to that gold nugget as well for a moment. The PowerPoint that I mentioned earlier today is our version of that presentation at the final interview. We used to do that in person. We used to have candidates do that in person, but now having them record the audio in advance gives my team some time. I typically get that to them about a week before. So they have some time to review it and create a list of questions based on that presentation rather than having it done in person. They can prepare a little bit more on the front end when it's been pre-recorded and sent to them in advance. So that's kind of our version of that same nugget there, and I think it's a great one. That's something we've been doing for years, and it's been extremely beneficial for us in selecting the right franchisees, and it also shows the drive and ambition of the candidate as well. So our brand is a little bit unique because our leads are 100% referral based, and they come through our website and typically have been a guest in our bakeries for a long time. So they tend to have a really solid passion for our brand already and not need to be sold per se. That's not always the case, but I'd say that's the majority of our candidates. So in my case, I need to really kind of temper what they think this business is, and again, it comes down to the transparency and being upfront with them about the fact that they're not going to be in the back of the house baking cakes all day, and it's going to be so much fun all the time. And I have to really educate them about the reality of what they're getting involved in, and that at the end of the day, this is a marketing business, and half of their day will actually be spent outside of those four walls pounding the pavement. So it's more about not necessarily selling, it's about tempering their expectations and really educating them about the reality of what they're getting involved in, rather than trying to oversell or be really a pushy kind of used car salesperson in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it, and both of you two just enforced my argument for it's a recruitment process, not a sales process. So yep. It's about selection. Eric, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that I can add to that. I think one, and the others maybe touched on this a little bit, but it's exceptionally important for all the salespeople and directors to use the same process and same presentations. And I think that doing that allows for everybody to come to Discovery Day and go forward in the process with the same level of competency there at the end. So that's worked real well for us. I've got 4 salespeople, but they all use the same presentation, the same checklist, and same everything. The other thing that we've done is, and I put this in place back in, gosh, it's probably 2008, and I love this step in the process. We actually have the Discovery Day invitation extended by somebody on the development team. It used to be me, actually. I did it for the first 7 or 8 years that I was there. Just got rid of it earlier this year, as a matter of fact, over to somebody else on my team. But I have a person on my team do the call for the invitation that is not a salesperson and does not get a commission based on the sale of the franchise. And so the idea is, you're sort of walking the line a little bit on this call. In some ways, it's like a sales call, because it's at the end of the process and you want to keep the enthusiasm high. But it's also somebody that's got a checklist in front of them that says, okay, yes, you do have the money, and tell me again how you're going to finance this, and do you have any major life events coming up that's going to impact the opening of the business? I mean, just really making sure and ticking the boxes on the things that we've seen that might have caused some problems in the past. So we want to make sure that they talk to franchise owners and that they heard the good, bad, and the ugly of the business. So all of that happens on that call. It's typically an hour and a half or maybe even 2-hour call. The other thing, and I think the others may have talked a little bit about this, is on Discovery Days for our brands, the salespeople really don't play an active role other than they typically take the candidate out for dinner the night before. And so the idea behind that, obviously, is I want the support team to get a real close, up close and personal look at these candidates. And so if for some reason there were to be a discrepancy in the support and training of franchise owners, that'll be caught at Discovery Day. And of course, the salespeople know that that's not what we're looking for. They know that it needs to be a nice, consistent message all the way through. So we rarely have any problems there. But it's nice to have that checks and balances built into the process as well. So the sales folks are not really presenting at all on Discovery Day. It's all the marketing and training and support people that are doing it.
Awesome. And it's great to hear that Discovery Days are really just as much candidate Discovery Days as they are franchisor Discovery Days. And I think that making it a two-way street and having candidates do presentations and not just sit back and listen is a great way to do it. In looking at Discovery Days, if you can just give each of you just a little bit of overview about, what your numbers look like. We're going to put a poll question out to the audience as well, as far as, do you view Discovery Day as a closing event, or is it really just more part of the process? Any nuggets, I guess, related to the Discovery Day, spouses coming, any additional stuff that we haven't already talked about. And Jenna, why don't we lead off with you?
Absolutely. Okay, so we actually call our Discovery Days Coming Full Circle, or CFC for short, and that's just in honor of the Bundt Cake branding. So this is the final step in our franchise awarding process. And so it's actually a 3-hour interview at our headquarters in Dallas, and we absolutely invite spouses because their support is completely imperative. But one thing that we've changed over the years is we are evaluating one lead operator for approval of the franchise, because what we were finding is when we would have a team of 2 people come in and interview and we approved the team because one was really strong in marketing, the other was really strong in operations, if one half of that team ended up not making it to the finish line or leaving the partnership for any reason, then we were left with a 50% as strong franchisee. So we have really changed our strategy to approve one lead operator that has to be solid in all aspects of the business in order to gain approval. So we don't require that franchisees actually sign a franchise agreement at our Coming Full Circle meeting. That is something typically, though, that happens a couple of days within a week after their final interview, and that expectation is set from me. They actually receive a copy of their fully customized franchise agreements for review prior to attending the final interview, and then it's expected that they sign within a week after that final approval. So it's definitely a balance between being part of the evaluation process for franchisees, but it's positioned as an interview as well. And we we also use it to make candidates feel really confident about other team members that they're going to be working with outside of the established relationships that they've already built with me. And 100% of approved candidates sign the franchise agreement after our final interview if they gain approval.
Wow, nice. Nice, nice. Interesting looking here at the poll results too, that 90% really don't use it as a closing event. The other 10% don't even use a discovery day in their sales process. And I know, back a decade ago, very many franchisors were, telling candidates to bring a check to discovery day, and it was a lot more of a high pressure sales process. Eric, any parting thoughts on discovery day and how you guys use them, or whether it's a closing event type of event?
Well, I love the name for Jenna's Discovery Day. I'll say that. I think that's brand appropriate for sure. I love that. I always make the joke to candidates, but there's a lot of seriousness behind it. The Discovery Day is a terrible name for this day, and I give them, the whole history that you just gave about how it used, franchising used to do Discovery Day, and it's about putting butts in seats. And it sort of, evolved to where most franchisors, at least the ones that really had a long-term focus for success for their franchisees, really wanted to meet in person with them toward the end of the process, because that's when the best questions were asked. And so I do that because I want to set their expectations. I don't want them, it's very late in our process, and I don't want them coming in thinking they're going to hear a lot of new information. And I'll actually say this to them. I'll say, you're going to come in, you're going to sit in Discovery Day, you're going to hear a lot of what you've already heard so far. Frankly, there's probably not a time that you're going to turn to your spouse and say, oh, well, I didn't know that. We're totally doing this now. It's not that kind of day. Of course, we're going to neaten up our cubicles and offices, and we're all going to wear our cute logoed shirts, and we're going to put our best foot forward as an organization, but we're not going to beg you to join, and, we expect you to come in seeking approval. And so that really, I think, setting that expectation, and we do the same thing as Jenna on the timing too. We tell them up front, our expectation is a week after Discovery Day, those documents are signed, the fees are paid, and we're moving forward. And we do, for Right at Home, we do 2 Discovery Days a month. For I-Core, we do 1 Discovery Day a month, but it doesn't really matter either way. We've always got another one coming. So if somebody starts to kind of put the brakes on or really feels like they're going to need more time, we'll hold them back until they're ready to make a decision.
Great, great. I hope somebody is out there in the lobby polishing all your FBR awards before the Discovery Day as well. Dustin, how about you? Yeah, Dustin, any final thoughts on Discovery Day, or unique things that you guys have some very unique approaches to development.
Just more reinforcement on what's already been said. So I'll offer a different, a different angle just from a spouse's perspective. We absolutely want the spouse of the candidate to come to Discovery Day with them. Now, in many cases, they're a team when they start their business as it is, but we want them to come, and so much so we want them to come, we actually pay for the travel for the spouse to attend with the candidate. So we really encourage it. We push it. We all know that the most successful people have someone next to them that can support them all the way, and if they don't, then it becomes an issue. So we want to address as many performance concerns up front as we can, and one of those is to get the spouse all the way on board, so we pay for them to come along. But again, everything else that's been said, we give full credit to.
Awesome. And I know, just to follow up on that spousal attendance, I know a lot of the discussion in previous webinars has been around, when you get the spouse involved. Justin, just for you, how early in the process before Discovery Day are you getting that spouse involved?
As soon as possible. Typically they're not on the call, the first call, the qualifying call, but when we do the brand review, which is step 2 for us, we are asking the candidate to please have their spouse available if they can be available. So again, as early as we possibly can.
Great, great. Well, I know we want to get to some questions for the panel, but we've got a couple more quick questions. One quickie that I have for people is, more and more I've heard of franchisors attaching the sales commission to some sort of performance results of the franchisee, whether it's opening or longer-term sales performance. Is anyone doing anything like that in your system as far as that commission that the salesperson is getting once the deal is closed? Is there little carrot at the end. Eric, why don't we start with you?
No, we don't. It's the salespeople from our perspective don't have the ability to impact performance after the sale, and so we've just elected not to do that. The only thing that we do is if the franchisee comes back and buys another territory, then at some point later we'll pay the salesperson on those. We just found that was a nice way to provide them an extra incentive to find good people.
Yeah, that's a great incentive. Dustin, how about you guys? Are you putting any hooks into that sales commission based on franchisee performance?
We're working hard to figure it out. We haven't done it yet. We want to. We just don't know the formula yet.
Excellent, excellent. Jenna, anything from you on that?
Not necessarily on the retention side, but I earn half of my commission upon signing and then the other half upon opening.
Great, great. So before we open it up for questions, just one final nugget from each of you. There's been so many throughout the call today, but if you can just share one other thought that's really had a big positive impact on closing deals, in the past few years in your system, what would that one thing be? And Dustin, why don't we lead off with you?
For me, it's a little bit outside the recruitment process. You've got to build a brand where your franchisees are successful from a unit economic standpoint. Once that happens, the development side becomes that much easier. Again, we talk about validation being a possible place where it can get thrown off, and if you got a good franchise brand that's strong, then that doesn't happen as much. So for us, using our franchisees as part of that process, being able to speak to some of the unit economics and whatnot, and that peer-to-peer communication is critical. But you can't expect to sell franchises and have the right people come on board if the system as a whole isn't healthy. And we, like many other brands a few years ago, just took a pause for a year on selling new franchises. Just get the system right, get the unit economics down, make sure that we're really strong as a brand, and then move forward again recruiting new people. So I think that's a critical component.
Right, right. Just to touch on that, if I'm a salesperson, mid-level salesperson in a franchise organization, and I completely agree with you, but senior management may not be on board and they're just pressuring me to get out there and sell. Any advice to help that person out to really drive home the importance of getting the unit economics right and maybe slowing down in order to run faster, a year or two down the road?
Well, I think it's the data that tells the story, and so it's about putting proper metrics and showing someone. Again, I don't know what a mid-level salesperson, if they're able to do that, but it should just be really the culture of the business. And if they can be encouraged, the management team encouraged to jump on calls like this and talk to you guys at Franchise Business Review, and you guys are so much into the satisfaction piece of franchising. Just to somehow encourage the executive to be more educated, and you can evidence that by saying, listen, here's the feedback I'm getting from candidates, and this much of it is from validation that isn't good. So if we can get that right, slow down to walk faster, right, or run faster. So I think that's the evidence they can provide. It's just the feedback they're getting.
Great, great. Jenna, how about any last nugget from you?
Sure. My biggest nugget is going to be to be picky. Don't be afraid to be picky, because that really changed a lot in our system. Going from, I really need to sell this candidate on why they need to buy a Nothing Bundt Cakes franchise, it really flip-flopped to this candidate really needs to sell me on why they're going to be a good fit for our brand. And so my suspect to lead conversion ratio is pretty low. It's only 4.4%, but my lead to completion conversion is about 25%. And that's high in the general scheme of things, because I want to make sure that I'm really bringing the best candidates to the table. That's going to be the best fit for the system, the best fit for them. And so just don't be afraid to be picky. That's my best advice.
And for the record, Jenna, your 4% suspect to close ratio is still double what the industry average is. So being picky actually works. So. Eric, any final thoughts, nuggets you'd like to share before we open it up for questions?
Well, I'll plus one the earlier comment on making sure that the system works. I mean, we can all certainly be be active in this business and recruiting franchise owners, but if the model's not sound, then it's not going to work. I think my biggest nugget I can offer, I spoke about this at the Franchise Update Convention a month or so ago. We've got this culture on our sales team that I call it collaborative competition. And so we do a lot of things together, both not just the team building stuff outside the office, but inside the office, those fireside chats that I talked about, CEO calls, they're on there. We do a once-a-month coaching session where I go in there and we just kind of share obstacles and how we overcome those. And the culture of the team, everybody is competitive, but they genuinely want to see their peers do well. And I think that culture has really allowed us to have a lot of the success that we've had over the last several years.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm getting the hook, and I know people don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from you guys. So I'm going to turn things back over to Mike. I know we've got a bunch of people that have great questions for our panelists, and I thank our panelists, but stay here for some great questions for the next few minutes.
Yep, thank you, Eric, and again, thank you to the panelists for another great discussion. We do have a ton of questions, so I'm going to jump right in. And first question is going to go to Eric Little. Eric, earlier in the conversation, you talked about having an executive call with some of your candidates, and the attendee wanted to know, is the executive phone call with the CEO with one applicant at a time or with several? Do you ever do multiple person executive phone calls?
Yeah, so I think the one they're talking about is the CEO monthly calls that we do, and those are never one-on-one. It's always group calls. And so, yeah, they're not one-on-one. I mean, I think that we've got enough candidates at this point where the group calls make the most sense.
Great, thank you. And a quick question for Jenna, actually, and you may have already answered this one. Somebody asked earlier in the conversation how you're driving leads to your website, and I believe you said that all of your leads are from franchisee referrals that wind up coming through your website. Is that true, and are there any other ways that you're pushing new leads to your website?
Actually, it's 100% guests that are visiting our bakeries, so it's organic through that method and also referrals from franchisees. But I would say the majority of the leads are actually guests in our bakeries that are just through the website when they visit the website. No other portals or brokers or any other methods that we're using. We're lucky, from what I hear.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for clarifying my mistake there.
No problem.
All right, so I'm going to jump to question. Jen, I'm going to stay with you, and I'm going to put this to the other panelists as well. I heard you say that you send out notifications to your current owners about potential prospects. When is this done? After Discovery Day or after the deposit balance or the deposit is given? To whom does it go out, and what information do you share about the prospect?
Actually, that goes out about 3/4 of the way through our process. So it is prior to our final interview. It is the step just before scheduling the final interview. So I send out an email to the entire system, franchisees at nothingbutcakes.com, and I let them know that these candidates in this particular area are interested in a Nothing Bundt Cakes franchise, and they would like to speak with you, and they are at the point in the process where they are approved to do so. So I also include their contact information, so if it's convenient for our franchisees, they can reach out to candidates directly, which they often do. But other than that, I don't provide any background on the candidates. I let them discuss that with the franchisees directly. So it's really kind of a generic email. Also included in that email is the link to the survey that our franchisees are able to take as it relates to their discussions with candidates, and so that they can provide feedback to us as well in that part of the process.
Great, that's great information, thank you. Dustin, do you have any similar process in your system? Do you let your franchisees know when there's a prospect coming through that might be getting in touch for validation?
We don't do it formally, no.
Okay, great. And Eric, what about you?
Yeah, so the technology we use allows us to pull a report for those that are in validation or forward in the process, and so that's uploaded every day about 4 o'clock to the intranet system that the franchisees have access to. We don't email them about prospects, but the list is out there for them to reference in case they get any calls. And then as far as the kind of the announcement goes, once a new franchisee comes in, we have something called the weekly update that we send out every week, obviously, to all of our franchise owners. And so typically we take pictures of them at Discovery Day, the prospects at that time. And then when they come on board, we'll put their picture and maybe a paragraph in the weekly update, letting all the franchisees know who the new additions are, where they are, and just a brief, history of their background and family.
Yep, and real quick, just to add to that as well, I do send out signing announcements. Once franchise agreements are signed, I send an announcement out to the system letting them know that candidates have signed the agreement, and to thank all of the validators for their participation in getting them to the finish line.
Great, great. Okay, another question for all three of you, and Dustin, I'll start with you. Have you ever done a discovery day for business coaches if you use them? I guess this applies to any kind of field staff, and the person didn't specify, but I'll ask it either in terms of a hiring process or just a training once they're already hired. Have you ever done anything like that?
Yes, in fact, we couple it onto our Discovery Day for candidates. So, for example, we've got a Discovery Day tomorrow, and we've got a potential new employee that's coming in for that Discovery Day. In that same Discovery Day tomorrow, we actually have one of the consultants or broker from one of the networks is coming in, and then we've actually have a consultant that we might be using a bit for a different part of our business coming in as well. So we'll have 3 franchise candidates and then 3 non-franchise candidates that are looking at different parts of the business, and they'll all be in the same Discovery Day. Now, at the end of that Discovery Day, towards the end, then we kind of break them out, and they meet one-on-one with the respective department or whatnot that they should be meeting with. But for the majority of the Discovery Day, they're all in it together.
Interesting, thank you. Mark, what about you? Excuse me, not Mark, Eric, have you use the Discovery Day type format or combined like Dustin has for business coaches?
Yeah, so what we've done is, all new employees typically go through a Discovery Day with live candidates, so to speak. I don't like commingling the brokers and consultants in with real prospects, so what we've done is, if we're going to do that, we'll invite a bunch of them out at the same time. We'll buy their plane tickets typically and try to do it during some fun, event that's going on in Omaha at the time. And so, a couple of years ago we did that and had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 of them come out. And what we try to do in those situations is we invite only people from that specific broker network. So we haven't really even commingled the networks together. So we might have, a franchise Discovery Day, so to speak, just for franchise consultants, and then the next one might be a brand that one. But we haven't done a lot of that lately, but it can be, if you work with the broker networks, it can be a great way to get in front of them in a way that you're just not going to do at the annual convention.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Jenna, do you bring in your business coach to do any kind of Discovery Day in your system?
We don't, actually. Our executive review committee consists of our president, CFO, Director of Marketing, Director of Operations, and Chief Development Officer.
All right, thank you. Here's a quick one for all three of you. Just as a brand, how often are you using press releases for your development efforts? I suppose I should start that with somebody. Dustin, I'll start with you. How often are you using press releases?
We'll send out maybe about 1 a week, maybe 1 every other week.
Okay, thank you. And Jenna, what about you?
We're doing it about once a month.
Okay. And Eric?
Typically for us, we do maybe 1 or 2 releases a year, and then beyond that, the PR company will create the release, but instead of sending it out on the wire, they'll just pitch the stories locally.
All right, perfect. All right. Here's an interesting question. Any experience using a panel format for validation calls, either multiple franchisees multiple candidates or both, as opposed to doing individual calls. Jenna, have you ever done anything like that?
We have not to date, but I've heard several brands that have utilized that tactic, and I know that it has worked for many. So I don't have any experience or exposure to that particular method at this time.
All right, great. And Eric, have you done any kind of panel validation call?
Yeah, so let me emphasize, I am not an attorney, nor do I aspire to be one. So check with your counsel, but we have done these. The key, I think, at least the advice that I've gotten is if you do them, make sure that you invite all of your franchisees to participate in that. So for example, for I-Core right now, we don't have a lot of franchisees, and so we are generating a lot of leads, and so that creates a bit of a problem because franchisees have businesses to run, and they don't need to be spending all day on the phone validating. And so what we have done is put out in our weekly update to all the franchisees, hey, the schedule for the next quarter is open. If you'd like to participate in these calls, they're once a week, and I'm going to give them a rundown of how it works. And so the idea is we've invited everybody to participate, and then those who respond are the ones that participate.
Great.
Eric Little,
this definitely a good point.
I just wanted to touch there. Eric, you obviously set that up. Are you on that call as well, or do you drop off? Because I know some franchisors set it up and then the corporate staff will drop off and just let the franchisees and the candidates talk.
Yeah, we're not on the call at all. We're not even at the. I don't think we're even on there at the beginning. I think it's just all set up, and the franchisee runs the call.
Great.
We do the exact same. We do every other week. We have a group validation opportunity. We invite all of our franchisees. We drop off the call, so it allows the candidate to speak to whom up. And then, in addition to that, of course, we're encouraging one-on-one calls. On the off week, that's when I do the CEO call with the candidates as well, and we do kind of a round-robin question and answer. It lasts about 60 minutes to 90 minutes at the very most. So we do use that method. It works quite well for us with the number of leads that we're getting. Some of our top franchisees get a lot of phone calls. So this panel allows those top folks to jump on. But again, we invite all. As Eric said, we're not attorneys here, so we've been advised how to do it, and we follow our counsel's path.
Great. Thanks, Dustin. And yeah, just to reiterate, if you're going to make any kind of decision about this, do check with your own counsel first, because none of us on this panel are lawyers for sure. So, Jenna, I'm going to come back to you. I think this question is in relation to something you were discussing earlier with FTDs. The question is, are you saying there's no option to agree to any negotiation in the FTD or franchise agreement that might be something used as an addendum in the closing? And I think you were saying that you tell your candidates right up front that there's no negotiation at all. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. Absolutely. So absolutely no negotiating. We don't make any changes to the franchise agreement so that it's fair and consistent with what we've offered our other franchisees. So they have to feel comfortable with it. However, comments and questions are welcome, and if they need clarifications, we'll make sure that that happens. But we do not make any changes whatsoever.
Great, thank you. Okay, Eric, let me come back to you, and this question is about real estate, and it says, does having real estate teed up in the sales process help the process? Do you have an inside real estate department or an outside real estate service that you use to assist with that?
Good question. So the brands that I have now don't really have a big real estate component to them, so we don't really, finding space is not a big issue, but I've worked with a couple of other franchises. And so one of those had an in-house real estate department that was very instrumental. That was the Quick Lube oil change chain that I worked for called Valvoline. And then there was another one that was an indoor children's birthday party franchise, and that one was interesting. We started out with one of the founders sort of serving as the real estate liaison, if you will, that would really fly into the market and look at the demographics and really kind of hold the franchisee's hand with regard to site selection and lease negotiation. And then eventually we hired a licensed real estate broker in-house who then part of his compensation was, it was all disclosed in the FDD. Part of his compensation was, upon the signing of these leases, so he had proper motivation to do that, and he would just have a split agreement with the local real estate people in each of the markets.
Great. Dustin, do you have anything to add to that about the real estate services that you might use internally or externally?
We're blessed. We don't actually have real estate needs in our system, so no, I don't have anything.
I do.
All right. Yes, please.
So we actually have a master broker, and we also put our franchisees in touch with a local commercial real estate broker in their market. So the local broker and the master broker combine efforts along with the franchisee and our chief development officer, and everyone evaluates locations together. They narrow it down, and then actually our president or our CDO will go out and spend a day in the market with the franchisee to narrow it down to their top choice, which is then presented to our site committee, of which I am a part, and we all evaluate that location together and compare and contrast it to others in our system, and give site approval at that time if it's warranted.
Thank you. We're just about out of time. I want to see if I can get to a couple quick questions before we sign off. One is a follow-up on the conversation about bringing in brokers and coaches for Discovery Day. And the question is, do you pay for their travel and accommodations when you're bringing them in? Eric, let me start back with you. And do you pay for your coaches to come in for Discovery Day?
Yes, I have to. I live in Omaha, so there's really no other reason for them to come to Omaha. I have to buy their way there and pay for the room while they're in town. I think that's a good best practice, though.
Yeah, I have heard that there's a good zoo in Omaha, but I've never been.
There is a good zoo.
Yeah. Dustin, what about you? Do you pay for your brokers or coaches to come into Discovery Day?
Yeah, short answer is yes, we do.
Great, thank you. And Jenna, what about you?
No, we do not.
All right, great, thank you. And let's see if we can do one more question here, and then we'll wrap it up. Do any of you have franchise developers that work remotely or do all work at your corporate location? So Dustin, do you have any remote franchise developers?
Yeah, we're the weird brand, right? That has our franchisees do it. They're all but one are outside of. We're based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and one's based here in Salt Lake, but the rest of them are all remote.
Thank you. Jenna, do you have remote franchise developers?
Was that for me?
Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Broke out for a minute. Actually, so again, I'm the only one in franchise development in general, so I do work remotely. Our corporate office is located in Addison, and I am the only one remaining in Las Vegas, Nevada. So yes, I do work remotely.
Great. And Eric, what about you? Are there remote franchise developers in your system?
So yeah, we've had both. When I started with Right at Home, we had 4 outsourced salespeople who were all obviously remote, and then today we have 4 that are all employees. 3 of them are based in the corporate office in Omaha, and then 1 is based in St. Louis. And so I would just, to echo some of the comments from earlier about the technology that's available, if you do that, it certainly can work. It's worked really well for a lot of other franchise organizations too. I think part of the key to that is using FaceTime or Skype or some other technology to include the remote person just as much as you can, and more than just the phone call. If you can see their face, it seems to work so much better.
Great. Yep. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. I know we're a few minutes over, and I don't want to keep you any longer. There are a few questions that we didn't get to, so I will try to follow up with those people offline and make sure we at least get you some kind of information. And the contact info for our panelists is in the workbook, so if there's something, some burning question that we weren't able to answer, please do reach out to them and see if you can get your answer that way. So again, thank you all for joining us for the series and today. Panelists, you guys were all fantastic. Really appreciate your time and appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day to attend. We will be sending that follow-up email that should be coming tomorrow with all the links and recordings and summaries for the 3 sessions. So you'll have everything you need there. And again, if you are taking this course for ISE credit, CSE credit, you will need to see all 3. So just check out the recordings for the previous 2 if you did miss them. We're going to wrap it up there. So thank you again, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, everybody.